Hello everyone and welcome to Manchester Pride's panel discussion on pinkwashing. My name's Claire Turner, I'm Manchester Pride's Special Projects Consultant, and I'll just ask my panel to quickly introduce themselves to you. So Amy, would you like to just say hello to everyone?
Thank you, Claire. Hi, everybody, and thank you for joining the session. I'm really looking forward to it. So my name's Amy Stanning. I've been working with Manchester Pride on the All Equals Charter and worked with the team there to develop the assessment process that helps companies and organisations assess where they are on achieving great LGBTQ+ inclusion in their organisations and influencing society. When I'm not doing that, I'm an MA student at Lancaster, and I spent the bulk of my professional career at Barclays, where I ran Spectrum, the LGBT network, for a number of years. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. Catty, would you like to just quickly introduce yourself, please?
Hi everyone, my name is Catty, or Catty Yoon, and I use they them pronouns. I'm an artist, writer, performance artist, and also an educator from London.
Great, thanks Catty. And Dwayne, if you could just introduce yourself, please.
Hi, I'm Dwayne, and I am currently looking after the sponsorship and partnership opportunities around Manchester Pride Festival this year. And I've worked across creative partnerships across a number of media outlets over the last decade or so.
Great, thanks Dwayne. So yeah, we're going to start a discussion, quite an easy question to start off with, just to get an idea from each of you. Why you want to be part of a panel that's discussing pinkwashing. Dwayne, do you want to open the conversation?
Yeah, I think for me, it's a really interesting conversation to have, given that I've spent a lot of my professional career working within a sponsorship and a partnership world, and always being aware of what brands are doing either at retail or online around big events. And it's sort of the last couple of years you see Pride coming to the forefront as a big marketing activity for brands, and I've always been quite conscious as to how authentic those relationships were. You know, was it more than just a window display on the high street with a rainbow flag in the window? And hence why I've started working with Manchester Pride this year as a big education piece, primarily for those brands and organisations in my wider professional network, to be able to actually take them into the core of a Pride organisation and educate them around the problems of pinkwashing. So it's something I've been very passionate about the last year or so. So to be able to join a discussion on this level is really exciting for me.
Great, thank you. And Catty, obviously Dwayne's coming from a really corporate side, and you as an artist, what's your creative take on pinkwashing?
Yeah, for me as well, it's something that I guess I've been quite passionate about as well, and been outspoken about online. I think it's a very tricky thing, and it's hard to make up my mind on it. And I've had a lot of conversations with various people who work at various sides of LGBT campaigning and stuff, and heard lots of different sides of it. I think for me, it's something that I've realized, especially this past Pride year, during the summer, I feel like it's something that I felt was really affecting me on an emotional level, and I felt like a lot of people in my community were feeling that way as well. So yeah, I think that's partly it. I think it's something that I always take with a pinch of salt in it. I've turned into the kind of person that if I see a shop has a rainbow sign outside, I actively don't go in. So I'm very excited to talk more about that.
It's interesting that you've seen a rainbow flag and it actually turns you off rather than encourages you to go in. So Amy, you're interested, coming from a really interesting point of view, because obviously you worked within Barclays, who are one of Manchester Pride sponsors, and then you're working on the charter. So what your initial thoughts on pinkwashing?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's a really important subject. I think I come to this from three perspectives. The two that you've mentioned, having worked in a corporate and also having worked with Manchester Pride and looked into organisations, corporates, NHS trusts, university and elsewhere, but also as a member of the public. And I'm absolutely, with Catty there, kind of, walking down the high street and seeing the rainbow banner in the window and thinking, so what? Yeah, what are you and your organisation actually contributing to our community? So for me, it's all about authenticity. So my expectation is that if an organisation allies itself with the community, sticks a rainbow flag, that actually means something in the organisation. Because if you don't, your staff see it really quickly and it disconnects them, and your customers will see it as well. And actually, the whole thing can be quite counterproductive. So I think for me, the pinkwashing debate is all about authenticity of organisations committing to and standing with the LGBTQ plus community.
Okay, great, thank you. I mean, one of the things that people often say is that it's kind of really financially exploiting the LGBT plus community through trying to tap into that pink pound. But do you think that there's kind of deeper harmful damage to the campaign through this, what's often seen as exploitation? Amy, do you want to kind of just comment?
Yeah, I think pure and abashed pinkwashing, in other words, a purely tokenistic approach, is corrosive. I really do, because if you as an organisation or as an individual, you're going to align yourself with any liberation activity, it has to mean something. Otherwise, people see through it. So for me, with corporate experience and doing the work I do now for Manchester Pride, looking into organisations, it's about what is the experience like in the organisation? To what extent is the organisation lined up for LGBTQ plus liberation in terms of its values, its internal practices, the way it hires, trains, supports and develops staff, the way it configures its products, the way it puts them out to the marketplace. And I'll give you one really simple example from my career. So a number of years ago, I was asked to look after a business on a short-term basis. The person responsible was unwell. And I challenged the team I had at the time about what they were doing to improve accessibility to marginalised communities for their service. And I got a lot of scratching of heads, so I thought I planted the seed. A little while later, one of my team members said to me, "Oh, kind of great question. What do I have to do?" So my challenge was, what would a same-sex couple wanting to arrange something with you, how would they feel when they came to see you? Would they be confident they would be treated appropriately, ask the right questions in an appropriate manner, and how would they feel? And I got a lot of, "Oh, yeah, not sure about that." So my response to that was, well, go out and ask. So what this individual did, he went out and he connected, funnily enough, with his local Pride group down in the south of England, and got a whole load of feedback and was able to then feed that back into the organisation to modify the experience. So it's when you've got that culture of, we're engaged, but actually we want to improve the experience and make a difference. That is when you combat it. Because if you don't, it's transparent, it's revealed as tokenism, and anybody can flog a load of t-shirts with a rainbow on it and not make any difference. So yeah, that's what's really important to me.
So clearly that authenticity is really important. I mean, one of the other things I've seen people commenting on it is that it reinforces stereotypes, particularly around certain products that are attached to it, and also simplifies the issue. Oh, we've got a rainbow sandwich, hooray, haven't we got equality? Does anybody, Dwayne, have you got any thought? Catty, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so for me, I think I totally agree with what Amy is saying. I think another aspect of it that bothers me a lot is also that I see pinkwashing as also whitewashing. I feel like oftentimes when companies had like make advertisements for TV specifically, they try and use very respectable kind of gay people that, you know, don't offend the eyes, and that often turns out to be white gay men, or, you know, white passing people that, you know, doesn't make people go, oh, that's too many things for me to deal with right now. And it's quite easy on the eyes, and we're used to seeing it. And that's, I think, what bothers me, how much it also contributes to whitewashing. But also, yeah, I think you said something also about like, hooray, we've got equality. Like, that's what it feels like sometimes as well, because I think marriage equality has was like such a big discussion kind of a couple of years ago, and it still kind of, I guess, is. But I feel like these companies are like, we're okay with you being gay and getting married, and it's like, well, what about all the other issues our community is facing? Like, it feels like this kind of empty kind of celebration without actually talking about some other real issues that we're facing every day, like homelessness and deportation of like LGBT migrants. Like, where does that sit between the LGBT sandwich that Marks and Spencers were selling? So that's something that I think bothers me a lot.
So it's quite easy to kind of oversimplify the issues, and that wider intersectionality of discrimination as well across the community. Do you think there's any way as a community we've kind of been complicit with it, and there's certain brands that we think are okay to do that with, but then other brands that we're much more critical about? So certain clothing brands, for example, or alcohol brands that we go, oh, it's okay, but we are maybe harsher on other different brands that we feel don't necessarily fit so well with our community. And Dwayne, did you, coming from the industry, do you want to kind of pick up on that?
Yeah, definitely. And I think, to your point of coming from the industry, you know, from being completely unaware of the levels and depth of pinkwashing as an issue and how conscious people were of it, I thought my personal opinions on it over the last couple of years were very much just someone cynical from the industry who was seeing this and had that understanding beyond, you know, a straight up media campaign. But when you scratch the surface, YouGov did a really interesting survey last year. And one of the main takeouts from that was 71% of LGBTQ people are more likely to patronize a brand for their LGBTQ friendliness. So it's almost like, as a community, we're on the offensive from the off. And that obviously stems from where you've got communities that have been traditionally underserved, either in the mainstream media or at that sort of branded, respectable level, that as soon as people start to get involved, it does raise eyebrows, and you think, are you actually doing it for the right reason? So I think when it comes to being complicit and accepting it, I don't think that's something that the majority of LGBTQ people would do. You know, the panelists today have already said they automatically would not go into a shop if they saw a rainbow flag outside. And that cynicism is unfortunately there. But the problem being, where we have to educate brands on that, is where you do have these high street brands, particularly where, you know, will put out a Pride fashion collection, but they don't actually do the due diligence around where the factories are sourcing these products for. And a lot of the time you've got them coming from countries where, you know, it's still illegal to be gay, it's still illegal to be in a same-sex relationship. But I think where you get the flip of the coin is the acceptance of brands, particularly where you talk about, you know, things like alcohol brands. You've got a brand like Absolute Vodka, who's done so much for the community over the last 10, 20 years. Of course, we're going to be accepting of them. And I think if you dig a bit deeper into the brands that people are accepting of, you'll find that it does go more, it goes beyond just putting a rainbow flag on your socials account or in your window over the month of June. And from a Manchester Pride perspective, that's something that I'm really conscious of when we get brands either approach us or we go to see brands about partnering with us. You know, I will always start those conversations with the fact that it is more, and it is about more than just being able to align with what we do across August Bank Holiday weekend. And it's about educating those brands around things like the All Equals Charter, you know, like the work that we do for the community organisations throughout the year as well. And things that we do away from the Gay Village Party and away from Mayfield Depot, like the emphasis that's gone on Youth Pride. You know, so from my perspective, I think we're probably as a community not very complicit, but I think where we do accept those brands that support us, there, if you look back at the heritage and history of those brands, I think you can see that they have really cemented themselves within the LGBTQ community.
Great, thank you. Amy, you wanted to add something there.
Yeah, I think for me, you know, kind of as I walked past, and I was in Edinburgh in the spring last year, and this kind of really struck me. I walked past I won't name them, but a well-established high street chain. I saw the rainbow flag in the window, and I thought, well, that's very nice. It must be Pride soon. And then I got to thinking, I wonder what the experience for LGBTQ plus people is in that company. Yeah. So if I'm a young trans man or woman trying to come out, trying to be myself, working for that company, who's there supporting me? What's it like? Do I feel confident? Do I feel protected? Yeah, you know, and you could apply anything for, you know, it's the same to any other constituency within the LGBTQ plus rainbow, you know, and I'd be asking, do they have a well-established staff network? Do they have an articulate voice? Do they represent the interests of LGBTQ plus people within the firm, and also actively seek the views of their customers? That's kind of what I'm asking. So I think when we see brands doing that, to the extent that we have power as consumers, it's about asking the next question. And it's about saying, okay, you're riding on the rainbow flag, that might drive some people in, that's cool. But what are you actually doing? You know, where are you on GRA reform, for example? You know, what's your corporate position on that? And I think something I've learned from doing the All Equals Charter thing is, and you know, representatives from those firms will be, an organisation will be on the session today. But yeah, what I've seen is amazing intent and commitment to make the experience better and learn and see how they can improve. And everybody's at a different stage of development. That's fine. That's natural. But it's that organizational intent, yeah, that has to be seen right through layers of an organization, whatever it is, to actually create that whole sense of authenticity and make sure they're not just riding on the back of a rainbow flag to drive a bit of trade.
Great, thank you. Cathy, did you want to add anything to
that? Yeah, I think something that came to my mind when Dwayne was talking was especially this idea of like complicity. I think a lot of times as well, these brands kind of, I mean, I just shouldn't say they prey on people, but a lot of times people who are freelance artists or people that need the money that agree to be in their advertisement, I think that can come across as like them being complicit in it, but we shouldn't forget the fact that people sometimes need that money. And I think that puts us in such a difficult situation, you know, when they're asking to work with an artist, like a certain sports brand, don't want to name names, but also like most of them do this, like, you know, make their products in countries where, you know, children who don't get paid have to make them. And also, how are they treating their employees? But the fact that, you know, even if you really don't want to be working with them, you kind of are put in a difficult situation where you feel like, well, I need to pay my rent, so I'm going to have to do it. And I think that's something that really bothers me about it, because, you know, as much as I dislike certain brands, I ask myself this question, you know, if I was desperate enough, would I just have to do that? And I think that's the very difficult like position they put us in, and we can come across as like, you know, accepting of them, but we have to kind of ask these questions of like, why Why do we get involved in it? And I think also, like, maybe for like the average kind of person, like they might not know the whole history of that brand and what they do. Maybe for them is about like being able to like pay their bills that month. And I think that's kind of like one of the core issues with this whole capitalist system that these brands kind of operate under.
That, I mean, that was one of the things I was going to ask people, because obviously, I mean, looking at us as a panel, we're of a demographic, we're a certain age, we're all really well educated. So for the wider community, how do they find out what is a really good example of cause-related marketing? How do we find out what are the companies that really are doing that due diligence, that have got the right organisational intent, that are really authentic? How do we spread that message across the community? Dwayne, do you?
I think you've raised a really valid point there, because it is difficult, and particularly if you are a younger member of the community, or you have some sort of a limited income, you might see certain high street brands who can do things at a cheaper level, being able to be seen to be championing pride, whereas you've got some really great brands who have great sort of cause-related marketing even outside of Pride season, but because of the nature of how they're set up as a business and the due diligence they go to in terms of sourcing products, you're naturally, you know, going to be at a higher price point and entry level. So there's that, and I think there's probably a wider discussion to be had about taking these issues outside of LGBTQ plus publications and forums like this. You know, is this sort of a panel something that needs to be replicated at the likes of Adweek and those other big corporate organizations? Because jumping back slightly, Claire, to your initial question around, you know, damage to pride, I do think there is the risk of this type of pinkwashing marketing having that impact. But I'd like to give those marketing departments at big corporates the benefit of the doubt and put a lot of it down just to ignorance and not actually understanding the wider reasons as to why a pride exists. And unfortunately, at some level, a lot of people outside of our community, their only exposure to pride and pride festivals has been at that celebration level. You know, so I think there's a wider piece and a wider discussion to be had outside of our own community as to how we can take the shift from event-focused marketing to cause-related marketing.
Thanks, Dwayne. That sounds really interesting, and I love the idea of taking that issue out wider, actually, into the industry, and not just within those organisations that are obviously coming to the conference with that commitment already at heart. Amy, you wanted to speak.
Yeah, I did. I just wanted to build on that point about cause-related marketing and coming outside the Pride envelope. So the thing that comes to my mind is, now, again, I won't name the firm, but I think many of us will be aware of some TV advertising that a well-known international coffee chain has done recently, featuring a young trans person. Okay, I personally think that's a very good ad. I think it makes the point really well about the power of being known as you are in your own name. Now, I hold no brief for that chain whatsoever, and actually, yeah, they're not my favourite chain, but I love the ad. Now, is it important to me that that ad is seen and it gets people talking about the experience and inclusion of young trans people and some understanding of at least a small part of their experience? Yeah, to be honest, that is. What does that say to me about that brand? Well, it probably makes me feel a bit more cuddly about them. But, you know, again, without naming them, that particular firm had a lot of issues with tax a couple of years ago, and may well still do, for all I know. I've not followed it recently, and I've never been inside that business, and I don't know what it's like there. and kind of what they stand for internally. I don't know. So what I'm saying is this is tricky stuff. Would I rather they put that advert out and it provokes some conversation and debate about the experience of young trans people? Yes. Is there a risk that there could be, and I'm not saying there is, but there could be an element of pinkwashing there? Of course there is. I don't know enough to judge. So it's a very delicate thing, and it's very difficult to come to, it's very difficult to come to a balanced and nuanced judgment about this stuff.
Thank you. I'm conscious of time, and unfortunately it's flying by, and we're kind of nearly at the end. And I thought, obviously it's a kind of a really contentious issue, and we've talked a lot about the things not to do and the things we don't want to see companies doing. I thought what would be a really good way to maybe end this discussion is to give the companies that are here today at the conference that clearly want to learn and want to support the LGBTQ community, can you what do you want them to go away from the panel? What do you want to see them demonstrating? What do you want to see them doing? And Katie, I wondered if you wanted to start off on that.
Yeah, I think I would say really think about kind of your whole company and how everyone's being treated, how your employees are being treated. If you're doing a campaign about trans people and celebrating trans people, do you have a trans policy in your company? What are you doing, after Pride Month? Like, are you donating a big sum to charities? I think how is like the money that you make, the profit that you make off of Pride, like going back into our communities? And that shouldn't be like 50p off of this, like whatever product goes to blah blah charity just because that's the only one we found. Like, really have a think about what you're doing like whole year round, and also like inside out of the company. I think, and also like being more I guess transparent about that. I think I'd love to know what companies are doing like the most that they can to support our community, and I think that would help our community and people who are like unsure about the whole subject, like look at the companies differently. And yeah, I think that's what I would say.
Thank you. Dwayne, what would you like to say?
Yeah, I think, at the risk of being cheesy and quoting Maya Angelou, I think a lot of these teams, when you know better, you do better. And I think it's about talking to us. Manchester Pride Festival as an organisation, we are experts in this. And I would be more than happy to have conversations with anyone who is involved with the conference today around how they can align their marketing in a more purpose-driven way. And that's not necessarily to say that, we would be going into that with an expectation that they would invest X amount into Pride Festival this year. I think it would be great if brands wanted to get involved with us more and spend more money with us. But I think, given what we've talking about today, there is a wider education piece that needs to be done. And I can see both sides of the coin, having worked within corporate organizations and worked with the big brand advertisers. I get that they have milestones and things they need to hit from a corporate level. So, the pitfalls of falling into the realms of pinkwashing are slightly unavoidable. But by having those conversations with people like us who can rationalize both sides of the argument, there is a piece of work to be done where we can help guide them through that, so it becomes as authentic as possible. And if nothing else, just leaves people with some food for thought as to how to reassess their plans going forward.
Great, thank you. And Amy, did you want to finish off on that?
Yeah, I think, I'm not going to, sort of repeat what's been said, so some really good points. But I think for me, whatever organisation you're in, if you're seeking to align yourself with the community, it's about the mindset that you have. What is it that you're doing to improve the experience of the people your business serves and its employees and the wider community. And there's lots of ways you can do that. Dwayne's mentioned some. I would reference the Manchester Pride All Equals Charter. Think about having an assessment done, a self-assessment, think about having a visit, and you get some fantastic feedback. And just one really simple example that came out of the beta testing with an organisation. We were talking about support for, this is an organisation that faces the public, and we're talking about support for non-binary customers and use of pronouns when registering. And they sort of scratched their heads around the table and thought, we don't actually need pronouns. So within a couple of months of that conversation, they've abolished asking for pronouns, which actually is quite a step forward for non-binary people, because you're not having to choose something from a subset that doesn't actually describe you. So little things can be done, but it's about a mindset of continuous improvement and thinking about how do we align our practice to the values of the LGBT community and what we're trying to achieve.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I was actually going to ask everybody who's listening to the panel when we were planning on obviously being live was how many of them had actually signed up to the All Equals Charter or planning to sign up to the All Equals Charter. So thank you, everyone. Amy, Catty, Dwayne, thank you. It's been a really interesting discussion. I could talk about this for ages. I think some key things for people to take away is that kind of organisational intent, where you're coming from. It's about educating and understanding and listening to the LGBTQ community or whichever community that you want to be working with. And obviously having authenticity throughout the year, not just kind of championing LGBTQ community during Pride. So thank you, everyone. If you want to continue the conversation, feel free to tweet the panelists using their handle and the hashtag, and it's hashtag MPConference2020. And Twitter handles will appear at the end of the video for you as well. So thank you ever so much. It's been a great discussion, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.